make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
What the book is saying instead is that when democratic societies slide even just towards authoritarianism, autocracy, tyranny, they do it the same way every time. It can be Viktor Orban's Hungary, Erdogan's Turkey, Maduro's Venezuela. The playbook is the same. The leader tries to weaken or remove rival centers of power that could act as a check or balance or restraint on him.
Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching our YouTube channel, we are so glad to have you. I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your ever faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well. Thanks, Will.
Hey, and today we are talking with Jonathan Freedland. He is an award-winning journalist, longtime Guardian columnist, former BBC presenter, and best-selling author of books like The Escape Artist. And he is out with a new book called The Traitor Circle, which tells the gripping story of a secret group of German citizens who quietly resisted Hitler from inside Nazi Germany. And it is a page-turner that I think you will want to pick up. It's written very much like a movie. So
yes.
We're extremely happy to have you on the show, Jonathan. So welcome to Faithful Politics.
It's very good to be with you, Will, and Josh. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. And so just to kind of start us off, our listeners and our audio podcast listeners will hear that you don't sound American. So maybe we just start, where are you calling us from?
Yeah, how can that be? I am speaking to you right now from London, England. I'm a Brit, as you can hear. I spent a lot of time in the US. I used to be the Guardian's Washington correspondent, and I, have covered and follow American politics ever since. It was a long time ago. I was a cub reporter when I was in Washington. I host the Guardian's Politics Weekly America, weekly podcast about US politics. But I also do, and have been for many years, a writer of books. And as you mentioned, this one is the latest.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. So the book, which actually your copy looks a lot thinner than mine. For some reason,
You're quite right. This is a proof copy, so it's just like advanced reader's copy. The finished article is what you've got, which is this, and it's a chunky hardback. This is the one that has the photographs and the maps, and crucially, because there are 50 pages of endnotes, giving you the actual sources and documents and archives where all of the facts in the book come from. Because a lot of people have been saying to me, they read things and they say, there's no way that can be true. That is unbelievable. How could that possibly have happened? And you turn to the back and there's the letter, the diary, the court transcript, the document, the archive, where that fact came from. So it's all there.
I love it. And it's like, so I'm also in the middle of reading Dan Brown's latest book. And
yeah, he doesn't have that.
He doesn't. I had to stop reading some of his book and Google is that true? Can they really do that with time? Anyways, it's a whole thing. So the Traitor Circle, the true story of a secret resistance network in Nazi Germany and the spy who betrayed them. So give us kind of the 30,000 foot overview of what the book is about and why did you choose to write it?
Sure. So in a nutshell, this is the true story. It's not a novel, even if on some level it might look like one. It's a true story of a group of very elite, some of them were aristocratic Germans who were either from some of the most nobility families of Germany or had high-ranking places in the old German bureaucracy and government, who came together for a tea party on the 10th of September 1943. What they had in common was not just that they were often from some of the most lauded families in the country or had powerful positions, but that they all were, and had been for a long time, anti-Nazi. They were defying or resisting Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich in a whole range of ways, which we may come on to talk about, because they did it in very different ways. They came together to talk about how they might advance their shared goal of a Germany without Hitler, planning for that day, trading information, sometimes just sympathy and comfort. What they did not know is that sitting around that table with them was somebody who they thought was one of their own, who they thought was a kindred spirit, but who was, in fact, about to betray all the rest to the Gestapo. And so what follows is if I've done my job properly, is that the reader will be thinking, well, is it the ambassador's widow? Is it the countess? In fact, there are two countesses in this story. Is it the doctor? Is it the founder, the headmistress, the founder of a school? Is it the former model? Is it the diplomat? You'll be trying to work out who is the betrayer. And then after that, you will see what the fates of these characters, who by then I hope you'll feel very attached to. Who will any of them get away? What punishment will they face? What are the consequences? That's the plot of it, if you like. But underneath it, because you asked what's it really about, what it's really about is why do some people resist and stand up to tyranny when it comes, and why do some buckle? And what is it? And I think this will be of particular interest, is my hope, to people who listen and watch this podcast. What is it that enables some people to stand strong when they're tested, when others cannot? And I hope that the answers will be interesting to people, but also surprising for many.
So I think this is such an interesting idea, because I've been thinking about this very thing, this idea that all this entire nation was essentially taken captive, but not just like the story is more complicated than they either just gave in because, hey, I'm afraid, and they just everyone loved Hitler, right? And just, wanted to kill all the Jews and had the same kind of racist ideology at the same level that Hitler did. And his top, commanders and philosophers and propagandists did, right? And at first I was thinking, it just seems like, I don't know, you shouldn't make a bad guy out of the German people, right? It's not like they wanted Auschwitz. It's not like they desired necessarily to cause 60 million people. I'm sure in retrospect, the idea of the cost, the sheer cost and human life and destruction is unparalleled in history. And it's absolutely, it's mind-boggling. And so they couldn't have had that in mind, you don't think? And yet it seems like they do have complicity at some level. Go ahead. I guess my question is, how has this book helped you figure out, are there levels of complicity, which it seems there are, but what are those, and how did the normal person share in that? What does this story tell us about that?
It tells us a lot. In a way, I've been sort of wrestling with the question you raise all my life, and I don't just say that glibly, because it really was from my upbringing. I begin the book by saying I grew up in a house where nothing German was allowed. There were no, Siemens dishwasher. There was no Volkswagen car. The edict actually came from my mother, my late mother, who, I stress in the book, was not herself a Holocaust survivor. But as I put it in the book, she had felt the breath of the Shoah on her neck. And I say that because when she was 8 years old, in March 1945, her own mother was killed in the very last V2 rocket to fall on London of the Blitz. So she was in effect orphaned. It's a long story, but not only was her mother killed, but it was in a very specific event, it landed on a building in the Jewish East End of London. The bomb killed 133 people. 120 of them were Jews. So obviously the Holocaust never reached Britain, but the tiniest inkling of that was conveyed in that experience that shaped my mother, because a whole lot of Jews were murdered by one of Hitler's weapons, in a flash at 7:21 in the morning. That shaped my mother. She insisted on that boycott of all things German, because she believed every last German was complicit and responsible for the crimes of the wickedest regime, either in human history or certainly in the 20th century. So that was my starting point. What I discovered in this book is it's not quite like that. It's not entirely unlike that either. And it's complicated. So an American, an investigator, war crimes investigator, who arrives with the liberating troops in 1945, starts the business of war crimes prosecutions, interviewing people. He estimates that 3 million Germans were jailed, detained, arrested, in the 12 years of the Reich for crimes of dissent, sometimes no more than a critical remark. 3 million people. And of them, he thinks 500,000 were put to death or never survived. That is a significant number. It's not nothing. On the other hand, when you work out how many citizens of Germany there were, you realize that's about 5%. And 95% fell in line. They raised their right arm and did the Hitler salute. So this is one of those glass half full, glass half empty things. Do you focus on the 3 million, a serious number, or do you focus on the 95%? And I let people make their own decision about which of those is most important, or hold both of them at once. But in terms of the 95%, look, to your point, Josh, some of those people will have been dedicated, committed Nazis, anti-Semites, followers of the Nazi ideology. Some of them would have just been terrified. And the degree of terror is, I think, one of the real motifs of this book. You realize this was a surveillance state. It was a paranoid state. You could not, every newspaper you read, every radio station you put on, it was controlled by the Nazis. You were worried about if you walked out in the street, there was Nazi propaganda blasting out of speakers on lampposts. I didn't know that till I did the research for this. There were speakers broadcasting Hitler's speeches in cafes and restaurants. It was wall to wall. But your neighbors could inform on you. Your co-workers certainly could inform on you. Even your family members might inform on you. And there's a character, a person in the book who says at one point, because the documents say that she said this, I can't even speak of these things, these anti-Nazi thoughts, in front of my own husband. I cannot even trust that my own husband won't betray me. So that was the atmosphere. And a lot of people who had families, had children, had homes, had jobs, did not dare risk it all by stepping out of line, which only makes the people in this book who did do that, the 9 or 10 people who sat round the table at that tea party, all the more heroic, because there was only downside, there was only risk, and there was nothing to gain.
The way you set up the plot at the very beginning, it's very Judas Iscariot-esque.
Yes.
and like the formation of a group of people that have an interest in defeating, a great evil also kind of has roots kind of throughout history. I mean, I've already mentioned the Bible, but I mean, the Avengers, right? Like all these people from different places, and they go to fight Thanos or whoever. So how did this group of people come together? Because the way you described it earlier, it's like, it seems like these people would never be in the same room. Yes. Under any other circumstances. So like, how did they get together and start discussing kind of what they're going to be doing?
It's such an interesting point. And your reference to the sort of Last Supper was really in my mind. I sort of, at one point I was counting up the people who were there, and I thought, is this actually going to get to 12, And we will be wondering who is the betrayer in there. It's actually 10, but the dynamic it was in my mind too. And it will come. We should come to the reason why it rang especially loudly in a moment. But in terms of how they got together, class plays a big part of this. If you have any even just brushing acquaintance with the sort of upper classes in this country, in Britain, you know that they know each other. The families know each other. They were at school together. These are interconnecting circles. Lots of them had those sort of social connections. One of the people I mentioned in passing, the ambassador's widow, Hanna Solf, her name was. She and her late husband, Wilhelm Solf, a former German ambassador to Tokyo in the pre-Hitler period, had turned their home into a kind of salon where they would have scientists, journalists, academics, clerics. Several of their friends were priests. One of them would become a famous anti-Nazi, Father Max Metzger, who has a sort of walk-on part in the book. An extraordinary man who at one point believes that it's very obvious that it's best for Germany if Hitler steps down. And so he writes a whole case for why Adolf Hitler should step down, puts it in an envelope and addresses it to Adolf Hitler. He's about to mail it when one of his friends says, I really wouldn't do that if I were you. That's really not a good idea. He was kind of a very naive, idealistic man who thought if he makes a compelling case to Adolf Hitler will, take the hint and retire from office. There were all these people going through that salon. They knew each other. And their class connections, in a way, acted to sort of vouch for themselves. That, I served in, my grandfather served with your grandfather in Bismarck's cabinet. We were officers together in the First World War. They knew each other, and each one knew one or two or three others at this gathering. There were overlapping social circles, but a crucial connection was this. The hostess of this tea party was a woman called Elisabeth von Tatten. She was the founder of a religious boarding school for girls, the evangelical rural home for girls in Wiblingen. She was a really seriously committed Christian and a massive believer in girls' education. And she ran this evangelical school that embodied her ideals entirely. She set it up in 1927, before Hitler came on the horizon. When Hitler arrives, goes to Josh's point earlier, she's not implacably opposed. She thinks, well, maybe Germany does need a fresh start. But very, very soon, once she realizes what Hitler's about, she doesn't want anything to do with this. And at one point, when Kristallnacht happens, the famous night of broken glass, she wails, she howls in pain in the assembly area of the school. All the pupils see her when she's just in sort of mortal pain at the cruelty that her country is inflicting on an oppressed minority. And slowly she begins to engage in small acts of defiance. She doesn't put up the picture of Adolf Hitler in the foyer of the school as the national rules demand. She begins to find a way for non-Aryan girls, Jewish girls, to become pupils at the school, even if temporarily. And there's testimony of people saying there would be a girl who would arrive at the school, then a few weeks later you would wake up one morning in the dormitory and you'd notice the bed next to you was empty. It's because she and her family had been spirited out of the country in the middle of the night and got to safety in Switzerland or elsewhere. Elisabeth von Tatten turned her school into a kind of sanctuary, and her undoing was that she gave, as she was required to give, a kind of sermon at a service to celebrate, in quotes, Germany's conquest of France. All German schools had to give a kind of Thanksgiving ceremony. She does that, and she takes as her verse for her address a text from the Old Testament, Hebrew scripture. And one of the pupils at the school, a 13-year-old girl, whose mother is the head of the local Nazi Women's Association, reports her for voicing a Hebrew verse. And the Gestapo then send in an inspector to her school, and the school is closed down for being insufficiently Nazi. That goes to Josh's point about the kind of what we were talking about in terms of paranoia. Merely to quote the Old Testament in a school assembly in prayers at a Christian evangelical school was enough to attract a Gestapo inspector. She was already a member of the Confessing Church. This was a dissenting breakaway church in Nazi Germany, broken away because the official church, Adolf Hitler, had announced he was going to be the head of the German church, and a few of them, Elisabeth von Tatten being one of them, said, no, the head of the church is not Adolf Hitler. The head of the church is Jesus Christ. And so she was already marked. But she's the hostess for this tea party. And, she is the most committed religiously, but she's not the only one.
So I would love to focus in on Wilhelm Solf for a moment. Sure. Because he's a complicated character in the sense that, he almost has this sense of there's a empathy for cultured Jews or patriotic Jews, but not necessarily, although, certainly, right, in the context would have been bold, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and yet there's not just this sense of Jews as humans. What does that kind of show about this complicated nature of the German view, which had, a lot of views that we probably would look at and consider racist, prejudiced, bias, whatever it is today. And even more like, how do you reconcile when people have these kinds of views and seeing the good in them as well as the bad in that sense?
It's such an interesting question, because I did wonder about it. And it's quite true that if you met somebody who spoke the way Wilhelm Solf, the husband of the one of the people at the Tea Party, you probably would think, well, that's a bit off. That's not how we talk in 2025. We have a better understanding of race and of diversity now. I'm quite forgiving towards him. He was speaking in 1933. Compared to the people around him, that was pretty progressive, what he was saying. It was an advance on what the people around him were saying. But I don't delude myself. I don't think these people were Philo-Semites. Rather, several of them had grown up in deeply anti-Semitic households, just because that was the air they were breathing. One of the characters, we might talk about her, she's an amazing sort of Lara Croft-style action heroine. Maria von Maltzahn is an amazing woman, but her mother was a serious conviction anti-Semite who told her, whatever you do, never marry a Jew. So sure enough, her first husband was a Jew, and then she has a secret Jewish lover in hiding, when you really could have been, that was on pain of death to be doing that in 1943. We'll come on to her perhaps later. So they weren't motivated by what we would now think of as sort of contemporary anti-racist view of full equality and egalitarianism. Rather, what they thought was, the Germany that we are loyal to treats its minorities or its downtrodden or its unfortunates with dignity and compassion, maybe even pity, but not cruelty. And they found that Adolf Hitler's persecution of the Jews to be a kind of affront to their patrician sense of themselves, which is, you may not regard Jews as fully equal. In fact, you may think of them as somehow a level below you, but you don't treat them cruelly. That's not German, and it's not Christian. And several of them found their Germanness and their Christianity was sort of offended by the savagery, the cruelty that they saw from Adolf Hitler, even if they wouldn't now meet our definition. But that's only one of them. So 2 or 3 of them actually do have very enlightened attitudes. There's Otto Kiep, this diplomat, who at one point said, he comes to this realization, having been a sort of fair weather Christian growing up. He struggled a bit with the New Testament when he was a boy at school. His faith would sort of come in and out. Sometimes he thought maybe these are just fairy tales and superstitions. But he finds his faith hardens in the period of the Nazi era. And at one point he comes to this realization that you could be a loyal servant of Jesus Christ, or you could be a loyal servant of Adolf Hitler. You could not be both. And that's a kind of moral realization that he makes. And it is, his faith gains strength as a result of it, because he realizes that Christianity, in a way, matters to him perhaps more than he'd even realized. But no, I don't demand of them the sort of attitudes I would hope, as a Jewish person myself, to encounter now. But I look at them compared to the people who are around them and compared to the prevailing ideology, I'll take it because it's better than the alternative. Last thing to say about that is Wilhelm Solf uses this phrase, cultured Jews, when he is in dialogue with none other than Joseph Goebbels. He's talking to a senior Nazi, the propaganda minister. It's possible that he was trying at least to make a compromise, that he knew he wasn't going to get Joseph Goebbels to see the humanity in all Jews. He's rather saying, look, at least the patriotic cultured ones, can't we save them? Again, that may have been a pragmatic move by him. And if it was, again, I'll take it, because what Solf did was then he would use all his contacts to get Jews of his acquaintance and even people he didn't know safe passage out of the country. His wife then does that after he dies in 1936. Their daughter does it. They're finding exit visas, forged papers, if that's what it takes. They're queuing up outside embassies and consulates to help people get out. That, whatever was in their hearts, in a way, their actions spoke very loudly.
You know, when you were talking about Elizabeth von Thaden, am I saying that
Thaden,
right?
yeah.
Thaden, of which I think there's a musical about her.
Yes, actually, her nephew wrote an opera, which does dramatize this aspect of his aunt or great aunt, I think aunt's life. It's an amazing story. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm curious because the way you're describing her activism, especially as it pertains to her faith, seems like there's a lot of echoes there for what's happening here in America. And I won't necessarily get into all the details, but in essence, it's like she was a certain kind of Christian or believer, and the society at large was trying to force her to become a different kind of Christian, one that places Adolf as the head of the church. I'd love for you just to maybe unpack that a little bit more. And then if there are any other examples that you could pull from where sort of the power of religion is used to both oppress and then also to liberate.
Yes. I mean, her faith was so important to her that it equipped her with a kind of almost superhuman strength. She was, and I'm sort of tiptoeing around it because I'm so keen not to give away the twists and turns of the story, but the group who were exposed by this betrayer were put on trial. And it was a huge event in the Germany of the time. It was a show trial with the president, so-called, of the People's Court, this very theatrical, performative man, Roland Freisler, who, would dominate his courtroom like a sort of Victorian actor, shouting and insulting and then whispering and being dramatic and all that kind of thing. And he sentenced some of those to death for their role in this Tea Party. Elizabeth von Thaden was extraordinary because she barely offered a defense. She felt as if this was a kind of martyrdom that she was going through. She didn't want to, wriggle and make excuses and sort of beg for her life. She felt she had, her conscience was clear in the sense of the justness of the cause of opposing Hitler. She had grave worries about her role in having landed her friends in trouble. There, her conscience was not clear. She felt very guilty on that score. But she did feel that she was sort of strengthened by her faith. And that, there are remarkable documents that survive, letters that she wrote as she contemplated, and I'm not going to say what did actually happen to her, but she contemplated this death sentence, where she wrote to other people of faith and said, wrote to them, "May God give you the strength to give strength and love to all of yours with the luminosity of the light of revelation until the hour strikes for you," she wrote. In other words, may you have the kind of inner peace that she felt she had as she was leaving what she described this spatial temporal world on her way to the homeland of love, meaning heaven. It enabled her to get through it, and her family described visiting her when she was on basically death row and saying that she seemed almost as there was sort of something ethereal about her, that she looked majestic, that she was, faith had in some ways driven her to these actions, but also had protected her. They acted as a kind of armor when she faced the consequences of her actions. I mean, the role of faith is strongest in her story, but there's also Otto Kiep, the diplomat, who he was a remarkable man. He was this sort of star in the German diplomatic corps before Hitler. He got the plum job of consul general in New York City. Imagine that job in the late 20s, early 30s. He was living this kind of Great Gatsby life of weekend parties on Long Island and horse riding and swimming and so on. He was having the high life. January 1933 comes, he's suddenly working for a new boss. He's working for Adolf Hitler. And an invitation lands on his desk, and it's to a fundraising dinner organized by two Jewish charities. And the guest of honor is the world's most famous scientist, probably one of the world's most famous Germans, and certainly the world's most famous Jew, namely Professor Albert Einstein. And he looks at this invitation where he's being asked to attend as the local German representative and thinks, if I go, I'm defying my new masters in Berlin, Adolf Hitler, who has made it very clear what he thinks of the Jews. But if I don't go, well, then I'm as bad as them. I'm shunning this man, this German of distinction, just because of who he is. And he has to make that choice. And it's a moral choice. And the choice, in a way, sets him on a path that leads all the way to that Tea Party. And as I say, what's so interesting about him is, unlike Elizabeth, who is religious and a believer from day one, you see his faith gaining strength as his life gets harder and as his situation gets worse. He turns to God rather than turning away from God. And there is a moment in the story, and again, I don't want to give it away, but there is a fork in the road that passes where he has to decide, what am I going to do? And he puts that decision in the hands of God. And I have a line in there when he thinks he's taken a big decision, and I write in there, but God had other plans for him. So it's a real connecting thread in this story. And perhaps in a moment I might explain why I think it is. I think it has a very direct relationship to resistance, but we might come on to that.
Well, I'm interested in getting there. Maybe this can serve as a bridge to help you connect that. You know, you're very honest, I think, in this story and even in this conversation about that these were not perfect people. They had inconsistencies. They were fearful. They were hesitant. They had to wrestle with the implications of their actions. And really, that kind of puts them as just human.
Yes.
You know, they had partial courage almost. And it really relates to me because I think with the benefit of hindsight, we are able to look at this and say, oh, wow, they were bad, or they should have made this decision, or whatever, cast judgment in some way, right? But you don't do that, but you're also very honest about that. Help us understand that tension there about partial courage instead of just pure hero.
Yeah. Well, Will
idea.
mentioned, didn't he, at the start, the template, the narrative template of the Avengers movies. You know, these are not those people. These are not caped, lantern-jawed superheroes.
They're more like The Boys, if you've ever seen The Boys. Sorry, it's an Amazon Prime. Anyway,
no,
I don't watch it. I mean, I'm a pastor. I don't watch that.
Of course not. They're human, exactly as you say, Josh. They are flawed and inconsistent, and often, as you're reading it, you're thinking that is the wrong decision, and they make bad decisions because they're in the moment and they don't have what we have, which is hindsight. So they say things that we can now look on and think are very naive, where they think, let's see how this develops. Let's watch and wait. It can't be that bad, And we're sitting there reading it because we know, going, wrong, act now. Several of them have chances to leave the country, for example, and they don't take them. And they don't take them partly because they're patriots, and they think their job is to save Germany, and another Germany, a different Germany, is possible. So they are really inconsistent. And, it's a small illustration of that, but I'll just mention this one. We often use the word fearless as a synonym for brave or courageous. And it's not right. There's one of the, I mentioned there are two countesses in this story, one in her early 30s, one in her late 20s. Countess Lagi Solf, she's the daughter of the Solf couple that we were talking about before. She is anxious. She's very fearful. She hides Jews in her home and is terrified when she's at home because she thinks, what if there's a knock on the door while I'm here? That is so frightening. And she's terrified when she's not at home because she thinks, what if they come for the people I'm hiding and I'm not there? She's all the time fearful. And what does she do, besides hiding, which is hugely brave? Just this is such a tiny thing, but I kind of love it. She walks around Berlin always carrying, she makes this her habit, always carrying 2 heavy bags of shopping. Why? Because if she runs into somebody who greets her with the Hitler salute, the extended right arm, she won't be able to reciprocate because her hands will be full. And I sort of picture her on the streets of Berlin meeting someone she knows and gesturing, oh, I'm sorry, I wish I could, but it's in my hands. Tiny, tiny gesture. But it was her way of defying this new normal and saying, I'm not going to do it. And I just think sometimes, what if every German had done that? What if every German made it a thing that they would always walk around with bags of shopping so they couldn't do the Hitler salute? In the end, the Hitler salute would have fallen into disuse. It would have just been a way for the public to say no. And they didn't say that. Most, 95%, let's go back to that number, raised their right arm. But she did it with fear and anxiety. It's just, again, this partial courage. Human. They don't know all of them. They're inconsistent. Some of them, under pressure, even join the Nazi party because they think that's the only way they can stay viable. You know, Elisabeth von Tatten in her school, true, she didn't display the picture of Adolf Hitler, but she did allow a branch of the girls' equivalent of the Hitler Youth to organize in her school. She just made sure that she controlled what they did in their meetings by having one of her teachers run it rather than somebody outside. They're making these compromises hour by hour, day after day. And Will, I think you mentioned, you know, the resonance you felt, and this will be controversial with what's going on today in America. And some people have definitely picked up on that. I just want to address that because I want people not to come away with the wrong idea. Nowhere in this book do I mention the name Donald Trump, and nowhere have I said or would I ever say Donald Trump is Adolf Hitler. It would be facile to say that. It would even be an insult to the victims of Adolf Hitler, to be honest, to say that. The horror of the Nazi period is singular, different in scale and in kind. I'm not saying that. What the book is saying instead is that when democratic societies slide even just towards authoritarianism, autocracy, tyranny, they do it the same way every time. It can be Viktor Orban's Hungary, Erdogan's Turkey, Maduro's Venezuela. The playbook is the same. The leader tries to weaken or remove rival centers of power that could act as a check or balance or restraint on him. He goes after the same ones. The law courts, the lawyers, the media, the universities, the independent civil service. Erdogan did it. Orban does it. They always do it in order that there'd be no checks on them. And the minute they do that, the dilemmas, the predicament that the citizens find themselves in, that's the same in every society or period you look at. They're suddenly thinking, should I say nothing? Should I say something? Should I say it later? Should I talk to other people? Should I keep it to myself? Maybe it's better to change from within. Let's watch and wait. You hear the same internal battles again and again. So there are some people who read this and think, wow, those are the dilemmas that, you know, ABC and CBS News were going through about should they settle. That's the dilemmas that Columbia and Harvard were going through about whether you make a deal or don't make a deal. The two things do not have to be identical for one to shed light on the other, especially when there is this recurring pattern. You don't have to go back to Nazi Germany. It just so happens to be that the dilemmas, the predicaments, pressed particularly vividly on the people, the remarkable 6 or 7 people whose stories I tell in this book.
That's absolutely amazing. And I got to say, Jonathan, this interview feels a lot like your book in the sense that I can just keep going, but it has to have a very defined end. And so with that, I just want to thank you for just writing this book, for coming onto our show, and tell our audience where they can follow you and where they can actually buy the book, if you have a preferred vendor.
I'm delighted you said that. Perhaps we'll give a link, because there is a page which can take you to all the retailers, whether it's Barnes & Noble or, people buy books online with Amazon, your local independent bookshop. There is a link which maybe we can put in the show notes, which sends you to all the different outlets. The book is called The Traitor's Circle. There it is. You can follow me on Instagram at Jonathan Freedland, on Twitter at Freedland, on Blue Sky at Jonathan Freedland, all those places. I was just going to make one last point because I wanted to connect up the reason why I think there really is a connection between faith and resistance. And it's just the last thing I wanted to say, if it's okay.
Yeah.
What I discovered about this group of people is, and therefore I think this is what equips people to resist, it's really important that you believe in some authority higher than the government of the day. If you think that the summit of all authority that can affect you is just the government of the day, you will buckle to the government of the day. But if you believe there's an even higher authority to whom you will ultimately be answerable and that you have to account for yourself to, then you will have the confidence and the courage, rather, the kind of inner steel to say no. Now, for some of the people in this book, that higher authority was almost German tradition. It was their families. It was their aristocratic lineage. This notion of a deeper, older Germany to which they were faithful. But for several, and we've talked about two of them, that higher authority was God, and it was Jesus. And they felt when the Gestapo knocked on the door, yeah, I'm terrified of you, but I'm not ultimately going to be held accountable to you. I'm going to have to answer. This is what Elizabeth von Taden felt. I will have to answer to God Almighty. And that, if you believe in something deeper and bigger than the government of the day, I think that is the common element in the people who found the strength and the courage to resist.
Wow. Well, that is
I love that.
I don't know. I don't think we'll ever get a better place to end than that. So with that, thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been absolutely fascinating. The Traitor Circle, the true story of a secret resistance network in Nazi Germany and the spy who betrayed them. There's a book again. You have to show, I think, the image like 7 times to really kind of like have it stick in people's brains. So there you go. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for stopping by. This has been a treat.
It's been a pleasure, both of you, Josh and Will. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And to our audience, hey, thanks for stopping by again. And as always, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. And we'll see you next time. Take care.